Imagine such a tableau: one shot, two potential victims, and hundreds of suspects. We shall narrate to you about the perfect crime, nearly perfect. On May 9, 1997, in the Italian capital, the day unfolded both literally and figuratively hot. It was a clear, sunny day. A young, diminutive blonde, a student at the University of Rome's law faculty, emerged into the courtyard from the educational edifice alongside her friend Yolanda Ricci. Classes had just concluded, and now the young women planned to stroll through the streets of Rome. The structure of the law faculty resembled the shape of the Cyrillic letter P, this detail being of paramount importance in a most intricate case. From the building's exit to the pedestrian street, inside the so-called letter P, lay an asphalted square. The friends took a few dozen steps towards the thoroughfare when suddenly Marta fell. Yolanda assumed her friend had stumbled. She leaned over Marta, calling out, attempting to revive her. Yolanda was struck by the fact that her friend's eyes were wide open and unresponsive. Marta showed no reaction to words or touches. Yolanda called upon passing students for help, then dialed the emergency number 118. 3 medics in white coats endeavored to assist the student on the spot. They administered artificial respiration, yet the young woman remained unconscious. Marta was transported to the hospital's intensive care unit, where doctors fought for her life. A tomography of the brain was performed on the victim. Marta had suffered a gunshot wound, the bullet passing through the occiput. The entry wound was behind her left ear. Inside the young woman's head, the bullet fragmented into 11 pieces. The largest shard grazed the brainstem. The prognosis of the physicians was bleak. Only a miracle could save the young woman. Meanwhile, the Rome police were informed of the attempted murder, as if the shooter had issued a challenge to the entire legal community of the city. Considering the scene of the crime, within a few minutes, dozens of cars with flashing lights began to converge on the law faculty building. Apart from police personnel, high-ranking city administrators and the head of the Rome Police Department arrived at the scene. Investigators commenced the interrogation of witnesses. Among the first interrogated was Yolanda, who initially did not comprehend what had occurred. Only after several tens of seconds did a dreadful thought occur to her. Her friend had been shot. Marta was walking when she suddenly fell. A dull sound preceded the fall. Yolanda asserted that she saw no one with a weapon. Parked cars occupied the square, but they were empty. Not a single one had moved from its place while she waited for the ambulance. Based on Yolanda's testimony, investigators surmised that the shot may have been fired from the windows of the university building. Parked cars were in front of the 2 women, and the shot was directed at the victim's occiput. Thus, the shooter could have fired from any window of the university building overlooking the inner square. The building was multi-story, with dozens of windows, and hundreds of students and faculty were inside at the time of the shooting. Questioning each of them would take months. Therefore, it was imperative to commence with those who might have benefited from the young woman's demise. While one part of the investigative team examined the scene of the crime, another part began to delve into Marta's biography and interview witnesses. 22-year-old Marta Russo, a 4th-year student of the law faculty, resided with her parents in the suburbs of Rome. She specialized in constitutional law and was a diligent student. Her father was a professor, and Marta endeavored to uphold his esteemed status. Marta drove a second-hand Ferrari, engaged in sports, was a regional fencing champion, abstained from drugs, and had not been involved in conflicts with other students. She had a boyfriend who was immediately excluded from the list of suspects upon verification. At the time of the murder, he was in another part of the city, as confirmed by numerous witnesses. The miracle did not come to pass. Martha passed away, unconscious, 4 days after the assassination attempt. As this incident gained significant attention, the funeral of the young woman was attended by the Prime Minister of Italy, Romano Prodi, the Mayor of Rome, Walter Veltroni, and hundreds of students. Despite her tender age, Martha held a remarkably mature wish. She had consented to posthumous organ donation. Her decision was influenced by the story of the American boy, Nicholas Green, who became an organ donor for 7 individuals after his death. Returning to our investigation, several motives for the crime were considered. The first motive was political. The 9th of May is a significant date in Italy. In 1978, Giuseppe Impastato, an Italian journalist, radio host, and activist, was killed on this day. He was known for exposing the activities of the Sicilian mafia in his articles. However, the most significant event of that day was the assassination of the former Prime Minister of Italy, Aldo Moro, alongside him. Moro was kidnapped in Rome by members of the left-wing underground organization, the Red Brigades. The organization operated in Italy from the 1970s to the late 1980s, aiming to establish a revolutionary state through armed struggle and Italy's withdrawal from Medo. On May 9, 1978, in Rome, in the trunk of a red Renault parked in the city center, Moro's body was discovered, riddled with automatic gunfire. It was suggested that the student and her friend, Yolanda, could have been involved in right-wing political organizations. Martha's murder could have been a punitive execution for those who disagreed with left-wing ideals. However, this version was not corroborated. Martha and Yolanda had never been members of political parties or movements. The girls were entirely apolitical. They did not even participate in the student council. As a second possibility, it was considered that the perpetrator mistook the target of the crime. The killer could have aimed not for Martha, but for Yolanda. From behind, the murderer could have confused the girls. Externally, Martha was a blonde, while Yolanda was a brunette. However, just days before the tragedy, Yolanda dyed her hair a lighter color. Now from behind, they could indeed be mistaken for each other, both being petite young women. This version had substantial grounds considering Yolanda's father's position. Renato Ricci held an important position in the Ministry of Justice. He headed the procurement department for prisons. Investigators speculated that Yolanda's father might have been coerced into a corruption scheme during prison procurement. Renato proved unyielding. Perhaps in this manner, the mafia sought retribution against him. Those whom he had crossed paths with in the past could have been seeking revenge. Before working in the Ministry of Justice, Ricci had headed one of the Italian prisons. It was not ruled out that Renato Ricci had a long-standing conflict with one of the inmates who, upon release from prison, sought to avenge themselves. This version, too, was not substantiated. According to Renato Ricci, no one had threatened him. He had not been implicated in any corruption schemes. Finally, the third version. Martha did indeed have a conflict with someone among the students or faculty. Therefore, the investigation had only a few indisputable facts in its arsenal. Martha was killed by a .22 caliber pistol. The presumed shooter likely used a silencer. The murder occurred in the courtyard of the P-shaped building, and the shot was fired from the windows of the university building. The shooter, most likely a man, had to choose a point for shooting where no one could interfere. In other words, the perpetrator could have taken refuge in one of the lecture hall rooms or fired from the windows of the men's restroom. The windows of the men's restroom were located on the ground floor, and it's worth noting that there were bars on the windows. The men's lavatory was thoroughly examined. It was locked from the inside. Forensic experts explored the lavatory in hopes of finding a bullet casing, but their hopes were dashed. Either the perpetrator took the casing, or the shot was fired from another room. The investigative team continued to scrutinize every inch of the building, including the basement areas. On the 11th of May, a room in the basement, utilized by a cleaning company, was searched. Here, the police made their first significant discovery. Rifle cartridges were found. Employees of the cleaning company were interrogated, and during a search at one of their homes, 3 rifles, a carbine, toy pistols, and a modified revolver for .22 caliber bullets were found. Homemade silencers were also discovered. The arsenal's owner, Paolo Braccatelli, admitted that he and his colleagues sometimes fired rifles in the basement room, engaging in impromptu shooting sessions. Bullet holes were detected in the university building's walls. Indeed, the workers had turned a public area into a shooting range. The theory that one of the cleaning company's employees might have accidentally shot Martha, while plausible, soon had to be discarded. None of the cleaning company's employees worked on the 9th of May. After the revelation of the storage and use of firearms, the cleaning company dismissed its employees. A few days later, a new suspect emerged. Investigators received a call from a technician in the forensic department claiming that the university librarian might be involved in the murder. 36-year-old Salvatore Zengel. The man reported that Zengel had an interest in firearms. The technician claimed that the librarian occasionally visited the laboratory at the department and showed interest in precision lathes. He asked whether he could make casings and homemade silencers. The information was verified. Investigators conducted a search, and at the librarian's house, 6 pistols were found, one of which was .22 caliber, along with a large quantity of ammunition. Suspicions against the librarian were further fueled when a collection of photographs depicting young women was discovered at his house. One of the girls in the photos bore a striking resemblance to Martha. Zengel was apprehended, and the man vehemently denied his involvement in the murder. He claimed to legally own the pistols. Permits had been issued for all 6 pistols. The photographs of models were given to him by a friend, the owner of a modeling agency. Later, on the 6th of June, the detained man was released. Ballistic forensic examination revealed that the pistols had not been fired for a long time. And most importantly, at the time of the shooting, he was in the philosophy department, as confirmed by university staff. However, the investigation still had consequences for the librarian. It was discovered that the firearm ownership permit he provided to the police was forged. Zengel was sentenced to 1 year of probation for illegal possession of firearms. Meanwhile, the inspection of university premises continued. It was decided to examine every windowsill in the building for traces of gunfire. Samples were taken from 53 windows. In reality, there were many more windows in the university building, but only 53 were suitable for shooting. On the 21st of May, gunpowder particles were found in room number 6, a large lecture hall, inside which was another room. This room was assigned to Professor Niccolo Lepere, a professor of philosophy of law, and his assistants. All those who had access to the room, about 40 people, fell under suspicion. Students who had a class on philosophy of law that day were questioned, as well as Professor Niccolo Lipari, a former member of parliament for the Christian Democrats, his daughter Maria Chiara Lipari, a graduate student. The professor and his daughter attracted the investigators' attention. In the assistant professor's office, there was a landline telephone, and it was decided to examine the incoming and outgoing calls. There were 2 calls made from the phone on the 9th of May, the first at 11:44 am to Professor Lipari's number, and the second a minute later, also to the professor's number. Most likely, it was his daughter Maria calling. During questioning, Maria Lepere recounted that she was indeed alone in the assistant's office that day and did make the call to her father. Maria was questioned several times. Initially, she claimed not to remember the details of that day. Later, she asserted that she did not hear any shots that day, but when she entered room number 6, there were already 2 people inside: 45-year-old Gabriella Lita, the secretary, and 29-year-old Francesco Leparata, a certified judicial officer. Gabriella was the first to be summoned for questioning. She claimed not to have been in the 6th room during the shooting and did not hear any shots. She was in the 4th room, sending documents via fax to Germany and making photocopies of documents. Leparata also claimed during questioning that he was not in room number 6. The investigators viewed the testimonies with skepticism. It was evident that university staff were hiding something. Believing that the faculty members were colluding, the prosecution decided to detain their leader, Professor Bruno Roman. On the 11th of June, he was charged under Article 378 of the Italian Penal Code. The police suspected that the dean of the faculty had forced his subordinates to conceal the true events of that fateful day. Perhaps he had threatened them with dismissal. The investigators believed that if he remained free, he could continue to exert pressure on the witnesses. The professor was placed under house arrest. During questioning, he vehemently denied pressuring his subordinates. The investigators were proven correct. Bruno Roman's arrest had a positive impact on the progress of the investigation. University staff feared that they might face the same fate as the professor and began to reveal the truth about what happened. On the 14th of June, Gabriella Aletta, the secretary, voluntarily appeared before the investigators and began to testify. Gabriella admitted that she had indeed entered the 6th room multiple times on the 9th of May. In particular, she communicated with Judicial Officer Francesco Leparota in the room, demanding legal documents from him. In addition to them, 2 men were in the room, whom she did not notice at first, as they were standing behind curtains. It is important to note that room number 6 was a large lecture hall combined with the assistant professor's office. Gabriella only noticed the men after a muffled sound was heard. One of the men stepped back silently and rushed out of the auditorium. In his hand, he held an object resembling a long-barreled pistol. He quickly placed the item in a leather briefcase on the table and fled. The second man followed him. He looked very frightened. Gabriella identified both men. They were university staff. Ferrari, his friend and colleague Giovanni Sattoni. It was Sattoni who held the gun in his hand. On the same day, the 14th of June, the police apprehended the man. Giovanni Sattoni was born in 1968. The 29-year-old doctor of jurisprudence graduated from the Faculty of Philosophy of Law and defended his doctoral dissertation on the topic, the relationship between mind and body. He studied the texts of John Locke and Immanuel Kant. Giovanni denied his guilt during questioning. He assured the investigators that he was framed by Catuni, claiming that on the morning of the 9th of May, he visited Professor Ligaldana's villa. He arrived at the university at 11:50 am, 8 minutes after the shot was fired, and could not have known what was happening in the inner courtyard of the building. He immediately went to the secretary and requested an exam verification certificate, which he received instantly. The clock showed 5 minutes to noon. After that, he immediately left the 6th room and went home. Therefore, he did not hear any shots. He only learned about the murder after 1 p.m. from television news when he was already at home. His father, a respected man, could confirm this. He did not know the victim. The investigators decided to find evidence to corroborate the young scholar's words. They requested documentation. The certificate issuance journal showed the time as 12:05 p.m. An ambulance entered the inner courtyard of the building at 11:59 am with the sound of sirens. Thus, at the time Giovanni received the certificate, he could not have failed to hear the siren and at least inquire about what was happening outside the windows of his alma mater. Giovanni asserted that he promptly departed the premises of the building, yet a student survey revealed that at 12:20, he was still within the university. By that time, numerous police cars with sirens had gathered around the university building. It is inconceivable to believe that Sattoni did not even inquire about the commotion within the walls of his alma mater. He could not have failed to exhibit basic curiosity. Giovanni Sattoni's peculiar behavior aroused suspicion among the investigators. Furthermore, after questioning the students, it was discovered that in his lecture on the 20th of April, Giovanni broached the subject of committing the perfect crime. These testimonies added to the suspicion towards the young scholar. Ferrari stated that he was not at his workplace, he was at home. His words could be corroborated by his parents and his sister, Teresa. He was informed about the shooting incident by his colleagues over the phone at 12:30. The investigators promptly requested a printout of incoming calls to the landline phone installed in Ferrari's house. According to the telecommunications operator, no incoming calls were received on the phone from 11:17 to 12:56. Salvatore's sister confirmed that her brother spent the entire day at home. However, investigators discovered that Teresa herself left the house at 11:30. She went to the gym. Teresa and Ferrari were apprehended. Ferrari was charged with complicity in the murder. Sattoni was charged with murder. The investigation had to answer the primary question: what was the motive for the crime? Additionally, the judicial officer Francesco Liparota was charged with complicity in the crime. According to testimonies, Liparota took the leather briefcase containing the gun from the office. Liparota denied retrieving the briefcase from the office, but he confirmed that Sattoni and Ferrari were in room number 6 together for some time. Later, witness Maria corroborated that all 3 suspects were indeed in room number 6. It is worth reminding that initially, she claimed to be alone in the office. Therefore, another witness, Giuliana Alsai, came forward. She informed the investigation on the 9th of July, 2 months after the incident, that she saw Sattoni and Ferrari within the university buildings around 12 o'clock noon. They were walking together towards the fire exit, and both appeared very agitated. However, the description of the clothing they wore did not match the descriptions provided by other students. In the subsequent trial, the prosecution would heavily rely on Giuliana's testimony. Before proceeding to the trial, it is noteworthy that 3D technology was utilized in unraveling this case. In the northern part of Italy, in the city of Ferrara, there exists an ancient university. At the university's architectural faculty, there was the country's only 3-dimensional laser cannon at that time. With the cannon, the courtyard where the crime occurred, and all the adjacent walls of the university building were scanned. Laboratory modeling specialists created a 3D model of the crime scene in a computer program, attempting to reconstruct the bullet's trajectory. The task, let us say, was exceedingly complex. The examination revealed that the shot was fired from the direction of the windows of room number 6. This conclusion was sharply criticized by a group of experts, which is quite justified. The examination did not consider the primary factor, the position of Martha's head at the time of the shooting. Thus, nobody could provide an accurate answer, not even her friend Yolanda. The legal process for this case proved to be lengthy and intricate. The prosecution leaned towards the version that Ferrari wanted to commit the perfect crime. He did not know the victim, and the victim did not know him. The defendant chose a location from which to fire in such a way that the shooter's location could not be determined afterward. According to the prosecution, texts were found in Ferrari's desk during the search, in which he reasoned about the perfect murder as a challenge to society and the law. However, the prosecutor failed to submit these documents to the court. He declared that the accusation of him murdering the student in the center of Rome was the worst slander he had ever faced in his life, and if he had accidentally killed Martha, he would have confessed immediately. Ferrari also stated that he had never dealt with weapons. Salvatore Ferrari also expressed in court his hope that the investigation would still find the real murderer. Salvatore insisted that they were falsely accused. The prosecution seemed to perceive the defendants as behaving very arrogantly. The countryside emphasized in its statements that the accusation was based on the testimonies of those who initially claimed to have seen no one in room number 6 on that day. So which version of the testimonies is correct? Perhaps the witnesses from the prosecution were subjected to pressure by the investigation, and the defendant's lawyers also assured the court that the secretary Lita and the judicial officer were coerced into pointing fingers at their clients. In reality, Sattoni and Ferrari were not in room number 6 on that day. The defense side learned that the secretary was interrogated for over 10 hours without being allowed to avail herself of the services of a lawyer, and she was only allowed to use the restroom a couple of times. The pivotal moment in the legal proceedings arrived when the court was presented with the footage of Gabriella Alita's interrogation. On the footage, it is evident that the investigators practically coerced the woman to testify against the young scholars. She resisted for a long time. The investigators hinted that if Gabriella did not reveal who was in the office, they would charge her with murder. In other words, she was compelled to fabricate a story about Sattoni and Ferrari's presence in the office. Following the screening of the footage, the prosecutorial work came under harsh criticism. Public opinion began to shift. More and more people started to believe in the innocence of the defendants. Here, we note the following fact. According to Alita's colleagues, on May 9th, she had a profoundly surprised expression when she heard about the committed crime on that day. But the most intriguing part awaited those present at the next court hearing. While testifying in court, the woman denied being subjected to pressure, denying a fact that was already evident to all. As a result, many considered the court's decision dubious. Salvatore Ferrari was sentenced to 4 years in prison for complicity in the crime, while Giovanni Sattoni was sentenced to 5 years for involuntary manslaughter. Nonetheless, the court deemed that the defendant had no intention to kill. The court found the version of the perfect murder presented by the prosecution to be unsubstantiated regarding the true motive of the crime, which formed the basis of the guilty verdict we will discuss later. Sattoni and Ferrari were also ordered to pay a civil compensation of €1 million to the parents and sister of Martha Russo. Sattoni served only 1 year in prison, then underwent rehabilitation through social services. Since he was charged with involuntary manslaughter, he was not deprived of civil and political rights. After heated debates, Sattoni decided to resign from the university, despite the fact that his job at the university was his main source of livelihood. After his dismissal, Sattoni worked as a translator and proofreader, writing books under a pseudonym. Even during the trial, Giovanni Sattoni married Georgina, a writer and screenwriter, in 2001. His spouse always supported Giovanni and insisted on his innocence. Satoni himself always maintained his innocence. He claimed that Secretary Gabriella Letta gave testimony against him under pressure from the investigation. Satoni proposed to the investigators to consider terrorism as the main version of the murder. May 9th is a memorable date for the Red Brigade organization. In his judgments, he referred to one fact that rightly deserves attention. Above, we mentioned the employees of the cleaning company and the .22 caliber pistols found with him. Paula Bracatella was the name of the employee. He was subsequently convicted of subversive activities and sentenced to 9 years in prison for involvement in the planning and preparation of the murder. Professor of law from the same university, Laspins, was killed 2 years after Martha Russo's murder. In 1999, Bracatelli was at the door of his own house and was a member of the Red Brigade organization. After all that has been said, it would be appropriate to present a series of arguments from experts who believe that Giovanni Satoni and Salvatore Ferrari became scapegoats in this convoluted case. The renowned journalist of the La Repubblica newspaper chose the phrase, "After all, Martha did not die of a cold," as the headline of his article on the Martha Russo case. The meaning was quite literal. Since Martha did not die of a cold, she was killed by Giovanni Satoni. In other words, he harbored doubts about Satoni's guilt. To corroborate his version, the journalist cited the following facts. In the early days of the investigation, there was much talk about a terrorist trace in the crime, citing the memorable date of May 9th. The murder of law professor Massimo D'Antonova 2 years after Martha's death indirectly confirms the terrorism version. Martha could also have become a victim of student skirmishes. The point is that in the second half of April '97, there were elections for the leaders of the student union at the university. The right-centrist forces triumphed in the elections. This provoked a negative reaction among supporters of left-wing ideas. On May 10th, the next day after the murder, a procession was planned through the student town in memory of another sad date. On May 12, '77, a student, Georgiana Massi, was killed on the university campus, and the case was never solved. In her case, everyone blamed representatives of left-wing organizations. According to the journalist, Martha Russo's murder could have been a kind of reminder to the authorities that left radical forces in the country are not asleep. Martha could have been a random victim. In his article, he skeptically regarded the trial of Satoni and his comrades, emphasizing the pressure exerted by investigators on witnesses. Witnesses said they were interrogated for 10–12 hours straight without even being allowed to eat. They were only occasionally taken to the bathroom. After the arrest, rumors spread in the media that Satoni wanted to revenge Martha for rejecting him. In reality, Martha and Giovanni were not acquainted at all. Martha studied at the Faculty of Constitutional Law. Satoni was not charged with involuntary manslaughter based on a ludicrous imitation of a movie scene. This version was taken as the basis for the guilty verdict. The point is that on the eve of the tragedy on May 8th in Europe, this date is celebrated as Victory Day over fascism. On television, they showed Steven Spielberg's film, Schindler's List. In the movie, there is a scene where a German soldier shoots at Jews in a concentration camp. He shoots for his own pleasure, for fun. According to the prosecutor, under the impression after watching the film, Satoni decided to shoot passers-by from the window. It sounds like nonsense, but the accusation latched onto this idea. According to the newspaper correspondent, such actions lack any logic for one simple reason. If Giovanni had decided to shoot people, he would have done it alone, not in the presence of witnesses. It would have been more logical to shoot from the toilet window. Another factor indicating the innocence of the convicted is the words of the judicial officer Leporota. After he was released from the courtroom, he said that he incriminated Satoni because of threats made against him. He was promised that during the arrest, he would be placed in a cell with those who, let's say, like boys. Fearing for himself, he lied that he saw the defendants in the 6th office. He repeated these words during the trial, but his initial testimony was taken into account. Regarding guilt, the opinion of representatives of Italian society was divided. Some considered him guilty, while others saw him as a scapegoat. Even representatives of the media covered this story from different angles, never reaching a unanimous opinion.